Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, Sony Pictures announces a limited US release of its comedy film The Interview on Christmas Day, reversing a decision to pull it following a cyber attack. The Korean government braces itself for any contingencies on the eve of the Christmas Day deadline set by hackers, threatening to launch a cyber attack on Korea's nuclear power plants. Plus, the United States posts its best quarterly growth in well over a decade in the third quarter. Stocks on Wall Street also reach record highs. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's noon Wednesday, December 24th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Jin-ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime. Now, you could be tempted to call it a Christmas miracle of sorts, really. The controversial comedy movie, The Interview, will now be released in US cinemas on Christmas Day, as was initially planned.
Right. It'll only be shown in a limited number of movie theaters, but Sony Pictures has hailed the decision as a victory for freedom of speech. Kim Myung-gil reports.
In what some are calling a victory for Hollywood, Sony Pictures says it is now going to release The Interview, a comedy film which depicts the fictional assassination of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in some U.S. theaters after all. In a statement, the studio's chief executive, Michael Linton, said they had never given up on releasing the movie and that they were excited it will be shown in a number of theaters from Christmas Day. One of the stars of the movie, Seth Rogen, tweeted that the people had spoken and freedom had prevailed. The New York Times reports that the biggest theater chains in the U.S. are still unlikely to screen the film, but Sony will likely be able to patch together distribution in 200 to 300 smaller independent theaters. Representatives from the 4 largest theater chains in the U.S. have declined to comment, only saying that negotiations over the film's release were ongoing. A week ago, Sony scrapped the release of its $44 million film after their systems were hacked and threats were made against U.S. movie theater chains. The cyber attack was blamed on North Korea, and the threats of violence caused major chains to pull the film due to security concerns. The Interview has been at the center of escalating tensions between the U.S. and North Korea, with Pyongyang denying it has anything to do with the attack. The White House said President Barack Obama welcomed Sony's decision, as America is a country that believes in free speech. He had earlier criticized Sony's initial decision to cancel the release. Sony Pictures says it will continue to secure more platforms and more theaters so the movie reaches the largest possible audience in the U.S. Kim Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Hyundai Group Chairwoman Hyun Jung-eun and members of the Kim Dae-jung Peace Center arrived in North Korea for a visit on Wednesday. Kim Yang-gun, North Korea's top official in charge of South Korean affairs, invited the 2 delegations last week and will meet with them during their day-long stay at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. He said he wished to express gratitude for the condolences both groups sent earlier this month for the 3rd anniversary of former leader Kim Jong-il's death. Former President Kim Dae-jung received the Nobel Peace Prize for holding the first ever inter-Korean summit in 2000. Hyundai Asan, a unit of Hyundai Group, used to run a joint tour program to the North's Mount Kumgang Resort until they were suspended in 2008 after a female South Korean tourist there was shot dead by a North Korean soldier.
Now, it looks like Korea's nuclear regulators are going to have a Christmas to forget. A hacker or a group of hackers has threatened to destroy the control systems of nuclear facilities on Christmas Day, Thursday, if the government doesn't heed their demands. They want operations at nuclear facilities brought to a stop, but they haven't specified why. Connie Kim reports.
Halt operations at 3 of Korea's nuclear facilities by Christmas Day, or face the consequences. That was a threat earlier this week from hackers who say they'll release tens of thousands of documents related to the nation's nuclear reactors and destroy control systems if their demands are not met. They've already leaked documents on 5 separate occasions over the last week. The information released Wednesday included blueprints for nuclear facilities. And in response to the recent security breach, the Energy Ministry conducted a 2-day-long cybersecurity drill this week on all of Korea's nuclear facilities. The network security of power plants was reviewed, as was protocol for shutting them down in the case of a malfunction. Trying to ease public concern, the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power Company says the leaks pose no threat as the information being released has no impact on the safety at the plants. But experts remain skeptical.
The hackers say they have about 100,000 pieces of data. Even if that data is not highly classified, it can be reassembled, creating a huge chunk of new information. Then it becomes very dangerous.
President Park Geun-hye has categorized the security breach as a grave incident. She called on the government to ensure that key facilities, including nuclear plants, are prepared to counter cyber terror threats. In response to the potential hacking threat, the Energy Ministry raised its alert level against cyber attacks 1 notch to the 3rd highest level of caution on Tuesday. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, of course, that is a huge and very serious hacking attack, but the number of hacking attacks being reported by private individuals is on the rise here in Korea. According to the Korea Internet and Security Agency, nearly 13,000 cases were reported over the first 10 months of this year. That's up by more than 2,200 from a year ago. An official from the agency said that it's not the number of hacking attacks themselves that are on the rise, it's the number of cases being reported, as public awareness about them is rising due to stories like we just heard. He added that the number of attacks detected far exceeds those that are reported, however. The number of phishing sites that impersonate banks or government organizations keeps on going up and up and up, by more than 600, in fact, to nearly 9,000 this year.
And going back to news on North Korea, with North Korea's internet connection going down on Tuesday and still partially remaining cut this morning, there are still more questions than answers about who or what may have caused it. The United States, for its part, isn't saying much about its possible involvement. Shin Se-min reports.
The U.S. State Department is sidestepping questions on whether the U.S. had a hand in North Korea's internet outage on Monday. Spokesperson Marie Harf told reporters that there was no new information to share about the issue, but added that U.S. President Barack Obama had spoken about the potential responses separate and apart from what we've seen over the past 24 hours, and that it was up to North Korea to address the state of their internet. Tuesday's press briefing came a day after Harf indicated that not all U.S. responses to the hacking would be immediately evident. President Obama repeatedly vowed of a proportional response to what he called the cyber vandalism on Sony. The U.S. is reportedly weighing a new round of financial sanctions on Pyongyang that would target the banks and trading companies used by leader Kim Jong-un and other North Korean officials. The U.S. is also reviewing whether to put North Korea back on its list of state sponsors of terrorism. However, such measures would largely be symbolic. North Korea is already among the most heavily sanctioned countries on earth, and Harf said there wouldn't be a large practical effect of additional sanctions. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about
A U.S. lawmaker says talking to Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe about Japan's wartime sexual enslavement is a waste of time. Congressman Mike Honda says efforts should rather be focused at the grassroots level to raise public awareness about the urgency of the issue. Hwang Seung-hee reports.
Representative Mike Honda says it would be a waste of energy and time to put pressure on Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe about Japan's wartime sexual slavery because he has no interest in resolving the issue. In an interview with Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, Honda said South Korea and the United States should increase pressure at the grassroots level and make them understand that this is a necessity for Japan to do in order to become fully accepted. Honda added the Japanese population over the last 2.5 generations has been ignorant about the country's wartime crimes since their government has not been teaching children about it. The congressman recently made a 5-day visit to Korea and met with some of the surviving former sex slaves as well as President Park Geun-hye. Honda played a leading role raising U.S. awareness about the issue, including making House Resolution 121, which urges Japan to formally acknowledge, apologize, and accept historical responsibility into a law. Saying that time is running out for the elderly victims, Honda said he's open to taking fresh action in Congress. But Honda said it is time for the White House and the State Department to turn up the heat and turn the screws on Japan for a sincere apology. However, with his landslide victory in recent snap elections, experts expect Abe to walk a clear path of an ultra-right-wing leader who wants to see Japan restored to what he believes was its wartime greatness. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The U.S. economy grew at its fastest pace in over a decade during the third quarter of this year, boosted by strong consumer spending and business investment. And with strengthening labor conditions and lower crude prices, analysts predict that the U.S. economy will gain sufficient momentum in the coming year. Kim Ji-an tells us more.
The world's largest economy grew at an annual rate of 5% during the July to September period, the fastest rate of expansion since 2003, and higher than the government's earlier estimate of 3.9%. Economists point to strong consumption, especially on healthcare services. Consumer spending jumped 3.2%, its biggest jump this year.
2/3 of the U.S. economy is related to consumption. And history would suggest that business investment lags consumption or lags economic growth. So if the overall economy is starting to accelerate, then 2015 could also be a fairly strong business investment climate.
The data boosted stocks on Wall Street, lifting the Dow Jones above 18,000 for the first time ever. The S&P 500 also closed at a record high. Growth projections in the fourth quarter are expected to record an annual rate of around 2.5% and 3% next year, putting weight that the U.S. Federal Reserve will stay on course and starts raising interest rates by mid-2015. Boosted by the strengthening labor market and falling oil prices, consumer outlays are expected to help cushion the U.S. economy from uncertainties in China and the Eurozone and a recession in Japan. Kim Ji-an, Arirang News.
And back here in Korea, despite the government's expansionary fiscal and monetary policies, consumer sentiment in the country isn't getting any better. Consumer sentiment has dipped to a 15-month low, and experts point out that the trend could make more consumers close their purse strings, pushing the economy towards a low-price, low-growth rate. Kwon So explains.
Korean consumers are not feeling too good at the moment, with the nation's consumer sentiment dropping for the third straight month in December. The Bank of Korea says its consumer sentiment index stood at 102 this month, a 0.1-point drop from the month before. It now stands at a 15-month low. That said, a reading above 100 does indicate that there are more optimistic consumers than those who expect economic and living conditions to worsen. Experts say that to tackle sluggish domestic demand, more needs to be done to raise consumer confidence, so businesses are encouraged to invest. Consumer confidence now is even lower than right after April's deadly Sewol ferry sinking. The government's monetary policies seem to have improved conditions in August and September, but despite another rate cut in October, things are worsening, raising concerns that planned structural reforms may not have been that effective.
When interest rates fall, typically we want people to borrow more, to consume more, buy more housing or invest more. But because we have such a high debt for households, they're not really borrowing that much to spend. So that path toward higher consumption and higher investment is very weak right now.
The central bank says external factors such as falling international oil prices and Russia's currency crisis are also dragging on Koreans' consumer sentiment. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
New figures show Korean stocks yield some of the lowest dividends for shareholders when measured against other global markets. According to Bespoke Investment Group, Korea's stock market dividend yields over a year period ending in July was ranked bottom, as you can see there, compared to other major markets at a mere 1.1%. That's a third of the average of the 22 countries surveyed. Emerging markets like Brazil and China yielded more than the average of 3%. The US, Japan and India marked less than 2%, but were still above Korea. Korean companies tend to hang on to their earnings for future investment, but analysts say it's important to raise dividend payouts. Otherwise, foreign investors will put their money into other emerging markets where they can get bigger returns. Now, a new business trend is emerging here in Korea. Lots of established online shopping malls in the nation are actually opening up bricks and mortar stores to provide their customers with another shopping option. One of Korea's biggest online shopping sites, Interpark, opened a toy shop in southern Seoul early this month and a 400 square metre bookstore in central Seoul in October. Home shopping malls like CJ Shopping also opened a clothing store in Seoul early this month, and GS Home Shopping is another one that plans to open temporary pop-up stores at least once every few months. Experts say the boundaries between online and so-called offline shops are blurring as companies try to take advantage of the public's interest in both styles of shopping. Korea's regulatory authority has slapped millions of dollars in fines on two of the nation's biggest movie/cinema chains for unfair practices. For more on this report, here's our Lee Ji-eun.
Korea's two biggest movie chains, CGV and Lotte Cinema, have been fined a combined $5 million for engaging in unfair practices. These practices include giving affiliate distributors more screens to show their movies and allowing them to screen the films for longer periods of time. The Fair Trade Commission said the moves gave CGV and Lotte Cinema an unfair advantage at the box office. The FTC pointed to two hits in particular: CJE&M's Masquerade, a 2012 film that attracted more than 10 million viewers, and Lotte Entertainment's The Taste of Money, which was released that same year on triple the number of screens than competing films. The watchdog said the two movie chains also gave out free movie discount coupons without the consent of distributors.
It's meaningful because the Commission is taking strong legal action for the first time against the unfair practices of large, vertical, integrated cinema chains.
Following up on the fines, the Culture Ministry says it will more closely monitor the screening practices of Korean movie chains to ensure that no benefits are being handed down to affiliates. The case has put the oligopoly of the Korean film industry back in the spotlight. The top three multiplexes in Korea make up more than 90% of screen shares in the country. About 30% of all films produced each year aren't even released in theaters. Experts say a new platform for independent, low-budget films is needed for diversification.
I think it is a great idea for major companies to build theaters only for smaller films, but not if it's merely a temporary measure to avoid the separation between distribution and screening.
Market watchers say if these theaters reserved for small firms are given enough support, a positive synergy effect in the industry can be created. Lee Ji-eun, Arirang News.
Let's now get a check on some of the global headlines we're following this hour. For that, we turn to our Sun Jung-in at the News Center.
Yes, Jung-in, for the first time, a Western journalist from Germany, in fact, who was granted access to the Islamic State militant group. He's been describing just how dangerous he thinks this group is.
Yes, the veteran journalist says the group is extremely brutal and says their plans include, quote, religious cleansing by murder. Connie Lee reports.
The first ever Western journalist to have direct access to the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq has returned with a strong warning about the militant group.
Has the power of a nuclear tsunami. It's incredible. I was so amazed. I couldn't understand this enthusiasm.
In an interview with ABC News and BBC Radio, the 74-year-old German journalist who traveled with the militants through territories they control says their official philosophy was brutal religious cleansing.
We will conquer Europe someday. We will for sure. We'll kill 150 million, 200 million, 500 million.
The journalist describes how he saw hundreds of fighters from all over the world arriving in IS territories each day to join the group. He says he's pessimistic that any Western country will be able to stop them. The inside look comes on the heels of a report from Amnesty International, which shows the horrifying reality that women and girls face under the Islamic State. The report says hundreds of women, especially from the Yazidi tribe, are tortured, sexually assaulted, and that girls even younger than 14 years old are held as sex slaves.
I am hungry, but it's better than getting sexually assaulted. I can take it all, but I just can't bear the thought of young girls being raped.
Across Syria and Iraq, in the midst of rubble and destroyed buildings, are the tens of thousands of Yazidi refugees who have fled the violence of the militants. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Over in France, authorities are beefing up security in public places in the wake of recent violent attacks across the country. Local police ordered the deployment of 300 extra soldiers to popular public spots over the Christmas period amid worries of a possible terrorist attack. The decision comes after a string of attacks over recent days, the most recent on Monday night in Nantes, where a man drove a van into a crowded market, injuring more than 10 people. 2 days earlier, a man stabbed 3 police officers in the city of Tours before being shot dead. Fears over revenge attacks have grown in France since the country joined the U.S.-led coalition in conducting airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria. And over in Ukraine, where a Russian-backed separatist insurgency is still gripping the eastern region, the country's parliament voted Tuesday to abandon its non-aligned status with an aim of eventually joining NATO. The parliament, firmly controlled by a pro-Western majority, overwhelmingly backed the move by 303 to 8. The historic step follows Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko's pledge to put the nation under Western military protection. However, it remains unclear whether Ukraine will join NATO, mostly because of strong opposition from Russia, which views the move as a threat to its own security.
Hello, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. The nation is looking cloudy today with milder temperatures compared to yesterday, ranging from between 5 to 12 degrees Celsius. However, rain or snow is expected for some regions in the morning hours. Now, less than 1 centimeter of snow is expected to fall in some regions of the Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, with strong winds expected to blow all across the nation. Now, looking further into the forecast, it looks like the weather is going to stay mild throughout the rest of the week, with the highs hovering above the freezing level. Also, there is no snow in the near forecast, so it looks like we won't be having a white Christmas this year. And here are our readings for today. Seoul will peak to 5 this afternoon, while Gwangju and Busan will be higher at 9 and 12 degrees. And moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks to 12, Dokdo hits down to 7 degrees, while Mankangang hits -3. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And this is where we say goodbye on this Christmas Eve.
Yes, Jinju and I are going to take the day off for Christmas Day, and we'll be back on Friday. To all our viewers, do have a very merry and happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.